I'd never noticed how loud a fork could sound against a dinner plate until the night my wife casually blew up our marriage. My name is Miles. I'm 37 years old. I live in a quiet neighborhood in Evanston, Illinois, a place that looks perfect on postcards but feels sterile if you stay too long. That evening started like any other Tuesday night. I was in the kitchen, trying to break through the invisible wall Elise had built around herself over the last few months. You know, we really need to get the gutters cleaned out before winter, I said, shuffling around mashed potatoes on my plate. I kept my voice cheerful, calm. Mundane things felt safe, predictable. I think that company we used last time still has an opening. Elise gave a little shrug, barely lifting her eyes from her glass of Pinot Noir. She had that distant look she always wore lately, her thoughts somewhere else, someplace I couldn't follow. Sure, whatever you think, she said, swirling her wine gently, staring at it like it held secrets. I knew she wasn't listening, but I kept pushing, desperate to pretend we were okay. Also, I talked to the neighbors today. They're throwing a barbecue this weekend, and they wanted to know if we're coming. Silence. Elise? She looked up slowly, her eyes almost vacant. I slept with my director, just once. So what? The words didn't register immediately. Instead, they hung in the air between us, surreal and absurd. She'd said it as casually as if she were telling me about a movie she'd watched, a book she'd read. I stared at her, trying to find some sign of remorse, guilt, anything. But there was nothing. Just a cold detachment, like she was testing me, daring me to react. "What did you just say?" I asked quietly, my heart pounding in my ears. She finally set the wine glass down, leaning back in her chair, her face set with that practiced calm. "You heard me, Miles. It was one time. So what?" Her tone wasn't apologetic. It wasn't a confession. It was a provocation. I felt the rage start to rise, hot and sudden. But then I realized that's exactly what she wanted. She was daring me to lose control, daring me to break and hand her the upper hand, to give her a fight she could win, and something inside me shifted. I felt myself grow cold, distant, detached. Without really thinking, I placed my fork gently down on the table. Elise raised an eyebrow, clearly waiting for the eruption that never came. "So," I finally said, meeting her eyes evenly. "That's it, huh? That's the best you can do?" She blinked, her mask of calm flickering for just a second before sliding back into place. "Excuse me? You always like to pretend you were so much more subtle than this," I said, almost amused by how calm my voice sounded. "I guess desperation brings out the ugly truth." Her eyes narrowed, confusion and irritation wrestling for control of her expression. "What is that supposed to mean?" I stood up slowly, my movements deliberate and unhurried. "It means I'm done playing whatever twisted game you've started here." I watched the confusion ripple across her face, followed closely by anger, then finally realization. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. I didn't need to hear anything else. I'd already heard enough. Without another word, I turned away, leaving the dinner half-eaten and Elise frozen in her chair, wine forgotten. I didn't slam doors or raise my voice. I just walked out, climbed the stairs, and closed myself inside my home office. It was quiet, dark, familiar. Leaning back in my chair, I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. 1,000 emotions were churning inside me, but anger wasn't one of them, not anymore. Anger was what Elise wanted. Anger would give her power. I wouldn't allow it. No, instead, I felt something colder, quieter, something final. I opened my laptop, the gentle hum soothing as it powered up. For the first time in a long while, I felt in complete control. Because if Elise thought she could break me, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. My home office had always been my refuge, but that night it transformed into something else entirely. A war room, quiet and calculated. I shut the door behind me softly, clicking the lock into place. The familiar hum of my laptop felt oddly comforting. I settled into my chair and stared at the blank screen for a moment, allowing myself one deep breath. Then, with careful, deliberate movements, I started to put together the pieces of Elise's betrayal. I'd never thought I'd have to do this, but now it felt inevitable, even overdue. Elise had always underestimated me. To her, I was predictable, routine, safe, reliable, someone who would just quietly accept whatever scraps of affection she tossed my way. But she was about to realize that even a predictable man can surprise you if pushed far enough. My mind sharpened into focus as I opened the laptop, launching the cloud services that I'd set up years ago, services Elise had never bothered to learn about or even acknowledge. I'd never intended them for anything like this, of course. They were for convenience, security, organization. They were mine alone. Okay, I muttered quietly, my fingers quickly tapping away. Let's see what you've left behind. I accessed our joint accounts first, credit cards, emails, social logins she'd forgotten we still shared. Elise was meticulous about many things, but technology wasn't one of them. She'd leave browser sessions logged in, saved passwords, location tracking on, all without a second thought. It didn't take me long to find the first piece. Her phone's location history from 4 weeks ago, a series of precise dots neatly aligned at a boutique hotel downtown. 3 separate visits, each timed perfectly around her late rehearsals. I saved screenshots, labeling the files clearly, professionally. Then the financials, joint credit cards that she'd recklessly used. Hotel charges disguised as corporate dining, wine orders at odd hours, purchases at stores she'd normally scoff at. I lined them up one by one, creating a meticulous, detailed archive, time-stamped and undeniable. Slack messages popped up next, casual exchanges filled with barely concealed flirting. Nothing explicit enough for immediate suspicion, yet damning in context. "Great job tonight," he had written after one particularly long rehearsal. "You're indispensable," her reply. "Couldn't have done it without you." Each file neatly joined the growing archive, encrypted and secure, labeled simply as bored. I didn't call it truth. Truth implies emotions, honesty, confession. No, this was something colder, strategic. A move on a chessboard, deliberate and impersonal. Elise had started this game, and now she was just another piece to maneuver. Hours passed silently. The room darkened slowly around me, the bluish glow of the screen illuminating my face. By the time I finally paused, my digital collection was extensive, a full timeline of her deception, from first suspicious moment to last confirmed betrayal. I leaned back, my eyes briefly closing, letting the reality settle. I felt no joy in this, no sense of triumph, but I did feel clarity, sharp, crystal clear understanding of what needed to happen next. Finally, I opened our prenup document, a cold and clinical contract we'd signed years before. Elise had laughed about it at the time, dismissing the fidelity clause as so unnecessary, claiming neither of us would ever need it. I smiled faintly to myself. Sometimes the things we dismiss are the very things we later wish we'd taken seriously. I attached each carefully gathered piece of evidence to the document, forming a cohesive, legally unshakable breach file. The prenup's clause was clear, specific, and absolutely binding. Infidelity meant forfeiting claims, cutting loose any entitlement. Elise knew this clause existed, but I was betting she'd completely forgotten its strength. Finally, I saved the file to the encrypted drive, uploaded a secure backup, and had it notarized digitally. One final stamp of authenticity. As the confirmation came through, I felt a quiet satisfaction, not from revenge, but from control. From knowing that I had moved first in a game she didn't realize she was even playing. I rose slowly from my chair, my muscles tight from hours of sitting in focused stillness. Outside the office, the house was silent and dark. Elise had long since retreated to the bedroom, oblivious to what had just unfolded one floor above her. I made my way to the hallway, pausing briefly by the door of our bedroom. Her breathing was steady, calm, sleeping peacefully as if nothing had happened. For a split second, I felt a pang of sadness, not for me, but for us, for the illusion I'd held on to far longer than I should have. But then the moment passed, replaced by resolve. Elise had chosen her path. Now, I was choosing mine. Without another glance, I walked away from the bedroom, returning to the solitude of the guest room downstairs. Tomorrow morning, the real game would begin, and for the first time in a long time, I felt ready. The house felt different that morning. The sunlight spilling into the kitchen didn't feel warm. It was sharp, clinical, exposing everything it touched. I moved quietly through the rooms, feeling more like a visitor than the man who'd lived here for 7 years. The envelope sat in my hand, crisp and heavy. Inside, the flash drive was neatly labeled, Beside it, a short note written on thick white cardstock, precisely 7 words. You always said I was predictable. I placed the envelope onto the table. The word enjoy was written across the front in my precise handwriting, bold and clear, without any flourish. It wasn't sarcasm, anger, or spite, just a statement of fact. She'd chosen to enjoy her betrayal. Now she could enjoy facing its consequences. I stepped back, looking at the setup, feeling detached, analytical. The coffee pot hissed gently behind me, finishing its routine brewing cycle. I poured myself a cup and sat at the kitchen island, calmly watching the clock. At exactly 7:34 a.m., the familiar creak of the stairs told me Elise was finally awake. Her footsteps came slowly, sleepily down the hall, unaware of what was waiting. The subtle buzzing of her phone followed her, messages probably still rolling in, an innocent start to her morning. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, wrapped in her favorite white robe, hair disheveled, eyes half closed. For one split second, I almost saw the Elise I used to know, the woman I had loved before she became a stranger. "Morning," she murmured, barely looking at me. "Good morning," I said calmly, sipping coffee. She paused halfway into the kitchen, her eyes finally focusing on the envelope resting quietly on the table. "What's that?" "Open it and find out." She hesitated, confusion flickering briefly across her face. She approached the table, fingers lightly touching the envelope, as if testing it for danger. "It's early for surprises," she mumbled, faint irritation in her voice. "It's not a surprise, Elise. It's reality." She glanced at me sharply, suspicion clouding her eyes, then tore the envelope open. Her movement slowed as she recognized the flash drive and read the card, her face drained of color. What is this?" she said, her voice suddenly tight, barely audible. "Why don't you see for yourself?" She shot me one more uncertain glance before grabbing her laptop from the counter, her fingers slightly trembling as she plugged in the drive. I watched without moving, observing her every reaction as she clicked through the meticulously organized folders, photos, GPS logs, hotel receipts, and email chains. Each file labeled clearly, undeniably. Her breath came shorter, quicker. Panic tightened her face, replaced swiftly by fear and finally comprehension. She shook her head slowly, eyes darting back and forth, desperately searching for an escape, an explanation, a denial. How long have you been?" she started to ask, voice shaking. "Does it matter?" I interrupted softly, evenly. "This isn't the beginning of a conversation, Elise. It's the end." She looked up, eyes wide, and suddenly the confident, detached woman who'd sat calmly at dinner, daring me to react, was nowhere to be seen. In her place stood someone startled, unsteady, the reality of her actions finally clear. "Miles, wait. We need to talk about—" "No, we don't," I said firmly, setting my coffee cup down. "This isn't a debate. This is clarity. I gave you trust, and you threw it away. You made your choices without me, Elise. Now I'm simply making mine without you." She stood up abruptly, anger surging. "You think you're justified? You think this makes you better than me? Spying, collecting evidence like some creep? You can twist this however you want, but I think we both know the truth," I replied quietly, unmoved. "I didn't make you cheat. You didn't even have the decency to apologize when you confessed. You wanted a reaction. Now you have one." Elise stepped back, shaking her head, disbelief and frustration flickering across her face. "You can't seriously think this is going to end quietly. You really think you're just going to walk away clean?" I smiled faintly. "I don't need your permission, Elise." "You're out of your mind," she spat, her voice rising sharply. "You think your pathetic little files scare me? You think anyone's going to believe your quiet act?" "Maybe not," I said calmly, standing up and taking my cup to the sink, washing it slowly. "But they will believe the facts." She stood frozen for a moment, breathing heavily, as the full weight of her situation bore down on her. "Where are you going?" she demanded, voice trembling. "To work," I replied simply, gathering my jacket. "Life doesn't stop because you've been caught. You should figure out your next move." I turned towards the door, Elise's stunned silence behind me, more satisfying than any scream or shout could have been. It wasn't revenge or triumph I felt. It was the quiet, steady certainty that this chapter was closed, the final lines written. "Miles," she whispered, voice weak, vulnerable. I didn't stop or look back. Her voice echoed behind me, muffled by walls and distance, as I opened the door and stepped out into the morning sunlight. The door clicked shut behind me, a small, quiet sound, yet deafeningly final. As I walked to my car, I felt only one thing clearly: absolute clarity. Elise had chosen chaos, but I chose detachment. I chose to move forward. After all, it was her who always said I was predictable. And perhaps, for the first time, I was finally proving her wrong. The downtown Chicago skyline slid past my car window, an orderly blur of steel and glass. Morning traffic hummed around me, busy and oblivious to the quiet destruction I was about to unfold. It felt almost surreal, moving through a city unchanged, even as my personal world realigned itself. The office building was sleek, minimalist, expensive in a carefully understated way. A place built to inspire confidence in clients, a fortress of legal clarity and control. I nodded briefly at the receptionist as I walked past, recognizing my determined stride and leaving me to head straight into the attorney's private office. My lawyer, Evan Keller, was already waiting at his desk, sleeves rolled up slightly, dark eyes fixed on his laptop. He looked up when I entered, his expression cautiously neutral. "Miles," he greeted me with a calm professionalism. "Right on time." "Thanks for meeting me early," I said, taking the seat across from him. He nodded, closing the laptop. "Of course. Your message was clear. It seems there's quite a lot we need to discuss." I reached into my briefcase, pulled out the folder I'd prepared, and placed it calmly on the polished desk surface between us. Evan raised an eyebrow slightly. "This is everything," I said, pushing the folder gently toward him. "Chronological, organized, time-stamped. There's no ambiguity, no room for questions." He opened the file slowly, flipping through the pages methodically. As he skimmed the materials, hotel receipts, detailed logs of Elise's location, screenshots of explicit messages, and the legal documents I'd prepared, I saw the flash of professional appreciation in his eyes. "Remarkable," he finally said, glancing up at me. "This is clinical." I gave a brief nod. It had to be. Evan leaned back in his chair, the morning sun streaming through the glass wall behind him, turning his silhouette to a shadowy outline. "Miles, this is cold," he said carefully. "Effective, but undeniably cold. I'm aware. Just to clarify, you have no intention of reconciliation or mediation." I shook my head firmly. Number Elise made her choice clearly, intentionally. She wants chaos, but I refuse to participate. This isn't revenge, it's resolution, finality. Evan regarded me thoughtfully for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough? Then let's get started." We spent the next hour meticulously reviewing every document and discussing every step of the legal strategy. Evan moved methodically, preparing a detailed breach document, cross-referencing Elise's actions with our prenup's ironclad fidelity clause. By the end of our meeting, Evan was nodding, satisfied. "This is unshakable. You've laid everything out impeccably." "That was always the point," I replied. Before I stood to leave, Evan gave me a long, measured look. "Miles, you seem very composed about all of this. Not many people handle such betrayal with your poise." I paused, considering his observation. "I spent a long time trying to hold on to something that didn't exist anymore. Elise counted on me being predictable. I realized that letting her break me would mean letting her win. I won't give her that satisfaction." He offered a respectful nod. "I understand. We'll proceed immediately." I shook his hand, feeling a quiet sense of control as I stepped out of his office and back into the bright, bustling corridor. As Evan executed the legal side, I turned to Elise's professional world, the other half of her carefully maintained identity. Elise worked at a prominent advertising firm, a company whose public image was pristine, meticulously guarded. They built their success on image, reputation, perception, things Elise had always excelled at manipulating. But she had underestimated me again. Weeks earlier, when I first noticed her behavior changing, I quietly mirrored her phone. I hadn't used it immediately, hadn't crossed any lines until her confession, but now that quiet foresight became invaluable. As Elise panicked at home, desperately erasing messages, photos, and emails from her devices, she had no idea the evidence still existed, secure on my encrypted drive, safe from her frantic attempts to delete reality. I compiled the clearest evidence of Elise's affair with her director, focusing on messages exchanged during office hours, expenses billed to the company credit card, and hotel charges labeled as client meetings. When it was done, I saved it all onto a secure password-protected drive, carefully labeling it Employee Misconduct. There were no threats, no emotional statements, just facts, clear, irrefutable facts. Then, with steady, calculated precision, I forwarded the drive anonymously to her firm's compliance and HR departments, using their public compliance hotline. My note contained 3 words only: employee misconduct enclosed. The clock was ticking, silently, invisibly. Elise's carefully built corporate image balanced on a knife's edge she didn't yet see. She would know soon enough, though. Because for Elise, the reckoning wasn't going to come from me directly. It had already been outsourced. Her corporate reputation, carefully nurtured for years, would be dismantled by the very HR policies she'd helped enforce. I left Evan's building feeling oddly weightless. As I walked to my car, a soft vibration signaled a message. It was Elise, predictably panicked, perhaps finally realizing the depth of what had happened. "Miles, please answer me. We have to talk. This is getting out of control." I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. For Elise, the realization that her private betrayal had public consequences was just beginning to dawn. She'd spent years manipulating people, situations, narratives, but now she was the one being controlled by something far more powerful, the unyielding weight of her own actions. I slid behind the wheel, the car door closing with a solid, reassuring click. Elise had once told me I was too passive, too predictable, but what she hadn't understood was that real control isn't about being loud or aggressive. It's quiet, it's methodical, and it's final. The engine purred softly as I merged seamlessly back into the city traffic, leaving behind any illusions of predictability. Elise's choices had set these wheels in motion. Now, all she could do was watch helplessly as her carefully constructed life unraveled, one calculated step at a time. 3 days later, the unraveling began. Elise's downfall was quieter than I imagined. No dramatic public scenes or screaming matches, just a controlled, systematic collapse. I was at my office when my receptionist knocked on my door, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Mr. Harrison, there's someone in the lobby who says she needs to speak to you urgently. It's Elise." "Is security with her?" I asked calmly, closing my laptop. "Yes, they stopped her at the elevator. She's demanding to see you." "Tell them to deny entry." "Politely." "Understood," she said hesitantly, closing the door softly behind her. I watched the lobby camera feed on my laptop. Elise stood at the reception desk, clearly agitated. She wore dark sunglasses, her shoulders tense with frustration. Her poise had cracked, replaced by raw desperation. Her gestures became frantic as she spoke with security. She was trying to assert authority she no longer had, as if this place still belonged to her by association. But the firm's security was professional, detached, unaffected by her demands. They calmly blocked her path, their voices firm and unwavering. Elise took a step back, frustration evident in the stiff set of her shoulders. When she finally realized she would get no further, she tore off her sunglasses and glared up at the security camera, as if knowing I'd be watching. The expression on her face wasn't anger, not even hurt. It was disbelief, the look of someone who had always gotten what she wanted, finally facing a situation she couldn't control. I saw her lips move, words probably aimed directly at me, but the silent screen kept them secret. She turned abruptly, stalking away with quick, clipped strides, leaving the lobby in stunned silence. I leaned back slowly in my chair, exhaling a long breath. I didn't take pleasure in seeing her humiliated, but it felt necessary. Elise had spent years asserting control, manipulating perceptions, believing her influence was unshakable. Today, she learned she no longer held power over me. A soft ping from my phone broke the silence. Evan had messaged me. Elise's company reached out. HR is handling it swiftly. I typed a short reply. Understood. At her own firm, Elise's situation was unfolding simultaneously. My evidence had quietly, discreetly arrived at her HR department. Elise's carefully constructed professional image had always been her proudest achievement, her armor and shield. Now, it was crumbling silently in an anonymous conference room. An hour later, my phone buzzed again. Evan, this time with a brief, final message. It's done. I didn't have to ask what that meant. Her HR had conducted their investigation discreetly but rapidly. They'd found every breach, every misuse of company resources, every false expense report Elise thought she'd hidden so cleverly. The facts were laid out in meticulous detail, impossible to deny. By mid-afternoon, the quiet unraveling was complete. I sat at my desk, considering everything carefully. The finality of Elise's firing was not something I celebrated. I didn't take joy from her humiliation, but there was relief, a quiet satisfaction in knowing her illusion had finally been dismantled. It was a strange peace, a stillness born not of revenge, but of finality. My phone rang suddenly, the screen lighting up. Elise again. For a moment, I considered ignoring her, but curiosity won out. Yes? My voice remained even. "You bastard!" she hissed, her voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "You got me fired." "I didn't," I replied calmly. "You did. You destroyed my career, everything I've built. You chose your path, Elise." I only revealed it. Her breathing quickened with fury. "You had no right." "No right?" I paused, a calm bitterness in my voice. "Like you had the right to betray our marriage?" She was silent, momentarily stunned. When she finally spoke again, her voice had softened, pleading. "Miles, please. I made mistakes, but this isn't fair. Not like this." "Fair?" I repeated softly, shaking my head. "Was it fair when you sat at our dinner table and casually tossed your affair in my face? You didn't ask for fairness. You asked for chaos. You have it now." "You don't get to ruin my life like this," she whispered, desperation creeping into her voice. "I didn't ruin your life," I said quietly. "I only made sure you faced the consequences of your choices." "Please, Miles." "Goodbye, Elise." I ended the call gently, without waiting for her reply. I sat there quietly, the phone silent on my desk. The confrontation had no shouting, no violence, no drama. Only a quiet conclusion, delivered without emotion. For a few long moments, I just sat quietly, feeling the weight of the choices made, not just Elise's, but my own. I felt no joy, no pleasure in her downfall. Instead, I felt a quiet strength, a control born from standing firmly by the boundaries I'd drawn, finally enforcing them. My receptionist knocked softly again, cracking the door open cautiously. "Mr. Harrison, is everything all right?" I looked up, forcing a faint, composed smile. "Yes, everything's fine." "Good. Security asked if you needed anything else?" "No, it's handled, thank you." As she left, the quiet returned. I rose slowly, walking to the window and looking down at the city street below. It stretched on, busy and unbothered, unaware of the quiet reckoning that had just unfolded high above. Elise was no longer a force I had to manage, a chaos I had to endure. She was now simply a closed chapter. My life was my own again, defined not by what she'd done, but by what I had finally chosen to do. And as I turned away from the window, the quietness in my chest told me the hardest part was done. From here, I was free to move forward. I was working late one evening, my office lit only by the soft glow of the desk lamp. The city had quieted outside, and for the first time in days, I allowed myself a moment of calm. I was beginning to feel the first traces of peace, a fragile quiet that promised a new beginning. Then, as if on cue, my inbox lit up. A single new email, sender, Elise. I hesitated, finger hovering briefly over the delete key. Yet something stopped me, a blend of curiosity and caution. With a slow, steady breath, I clicked the message open. The subject line read simply, "Please." I read carefully, bracing myself for what I knew was coming. "Miles, I've written and rewritten this email 100 times, trying to find words that might break through the silence between us. I never wanted things to end like this. You and I, we had something once. Remember? Shared dreams, shared history. We can't just let everything we built crumble away. I'm sorry if you feel hurt or betrayed by what I did. It wasn't malicious, Miles. It was lonely. I was lonely. You were always working, distant, and I made mistakes because I needed someone. I never wanted it to end us. I thought we were stronger than that. Maybe you'll never forgive me. But don't we owe it to ourselves, to our history, to at least try? Let's talk. Let's go to counseling, rebuild something from all this mess. I'm reaching out because deep down, I still care about us. Please, Miles, just answer me. Elise. I sat back slowly, rereading her words carefully. There was a vulnerability, sure, but also something else beneath the surface, a quiet manipulation, an attempt to twist things back toward her narrative. Elise wasn't sorry. She was scared. Not remorseful, just desperate. She blamed me subtly, my long hours, my supposed emotional distance. She painted herself not as a betrayer, but as a victim of circumstance. She couldn't apologize sincerely. She could only deflect and redirect blame. But I felt no anger. I felt no satisfaction in her pleading, no triumph in her vulnerability. Just quiet clarity, a deeper understanding of who Elise was, who she had always been. I glanced at the email one last time, fingers steady on the keyboard as I clicked print. The printer whirred quietly behind me, neatly depositing her words onto paper. I reached over, collected the sheet, and wrote calmly at the top, Emotional Leverage Attempt 001. I placed it carefully in the file I had already started, clean, organized, clinical. Elise had spent years believing she could sway me with words, shape reality with careful phrases and emotional appeals. This time, she would see just how clearly I saw her intentions. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say, no discussion to have, no bridge to rebuild. Elise's actions were louder than her words. Her plea was not an apology, it was damage control. Days passed quietly, and I focused on my own life again. The silence felt powerful. With each unanswered plea, I took back another small piece of myself. Yet Elise was persistent. A few days later, another email appeared. Miles, you're punishing me, and maybe I deserve that. But what good will it do in the end? If we don't at least talk, what chance do we have to ever heal? Do you want us to stay bitter forever? Please, Miles, just one conversation. For closure. Elise. I shook my head slightly as I read, feeling a strange sense of detachment. Elise didn't want closure. She wanted control over me, over the narrative, over her own guilt. She kept trying, sending messages laced with subtle guilt and quiet manipulation, appeals to shared memories, claims of being misunderstood, vague hints at regret. Each time, I calmly printed the email and labeled it. Attempt 002, Attempt 003, and so forth, archiving each neatly in a file she would never see. Finally, after another week, she sent one more message, shorter and rawer than the others. Miles, you can't just erase me like I never existed. I made mistakes, but so did you. We both failed, but only I'm paying for it. Is that fair? If this is how you want it, silence, bitterness, coldness, then fine. But at least have the decency to tell me it's truly over. Give me that, at least. Elise. I paused, fingers resting lightly on the keyboard, contemplating carefully. She wanted confirmation, closure, a clear final word. And perhaps she was right. Perhaps I owed her that much clarity. I typed carefully, thoughtfully, then reread it once before sending. Elise, I never erased you. You erased yourself. This isn't about punishment or fairness. It's about boundaries and respect. You felt powerful when you said, so what? That was your moment. This is mine. There is nothing left to say. Miles, I sent it without hesitation, my finger clicking firmly, quietly, finally. I stood up slowly, closed my laptop, and turned off my office lamp. The room fell into quiet darkness around me. I felt no victory, no anger, no regret, just calm resolve. The truth was simple. Elise wasn't seeking forgiveness. She wanted control. And I had finally decisively refused to hand it to her. As I walked out of the office and headed home through the quiet streets, a deep sense of peace settled over me. It felt like the first breath of clean air after a storm, refreshing, liberating, true. And with every step away from that inbox, every step away from Elise's carefully crafted narrative, I felt a little lighter, a little freer. The silence that followed was my answer. Sunday mornings in Evanston were always vibrant, energetic, families strolling along sidewalks, students gathering at busy cafes. Life carrying on, completely unaware of the silent collapse taking place in the booth near the back corner of a trendy brunch spot. I wasn't there, of course. Elise had long since ceased to be my concern. But even from a distance, I knew exactly how it would unfold. Every step had been quietly set into motion days before. Now, I simply sat at home, sipping coffee in calm solitude, and waited for the phone to ring. Across town, Elise sat at brunch with her sister, Audrey, maintaining appearances, holding desperately to the fraying threads of her normalcy. Her polished composure would have been perfect, even practiced, until the moment it all unraveled. And unravel it did, quietly and without fanfare. The courier entered the cafe precisely at 11:15 a.m., as I'd arranged. He approached the hostess, said a few quiet words, and she pointed discreetly toward Elise's table. Elise, oblivious, was busy speaking animatedly, gesturing to her sister, perhaps already spinning some careful narrative about victimhood and unfairness. The courier reached her table and politely interrupted. "Excuse me, Ms. Harrison?" "Yes?" Elise looked up, confused, maybe even a touch irritated at the intrusion. "I was asked to deliver this to you personally. If you could just sign here." He extended a small digital pad and stylus. "What is it?" she asked cautiously. "I just deliver the documents, ma'am. Instructions were to ensure this reached you directly. Have a good day." He placed the thin, neat envelope gently beside her plate, turned, and left as swiftly and quietly as he'd come. Audrey glanced curiously at Elise. "What is that?" "I'm not sure," Elise said, her voice faintly shaky. I knew her well enough to picture the slight tremble in her fingers as she picked it up, recognizing the official markings of my attorney's stationery. She slid her finger under the seal, opening it slowly, deliberately. When she unfolded the papers and read the words, "Dissolution of marriage," the color drained instantly from her face. Audrey must have noticed her sister's expression, leaning forward slightly. "Elise?" "What's wrong?" Elise didn't answer, couldn't answer, as she stared down at the printed words. Her life meticulously broken down into clinical bullet points. Division of assets, denial of alimony per the prenup terms, loss of all jointly held property, and full custody of our two beloved dogs, Bella and Scout, going solely to me. The carefully constructed walls she'd built around herself, walls of control, manipulation, and illusion, crumbled quietly in that crowded cafe, reduced to nothing by stark legal language and the harsh, undeniable truth. "Elise?" Audrey repeated urgently, her voice rising in concern. But Elise only stared, frozen in shock and disbelief. I had always been predictable, passive, manageable. She'd never believed I was capable of something like this, calculated, decisive, absolute. Around them, brunch continued obliviously. Clinking plates, gentle chatter, laughter drifting from other tables. Life carrying on, unbothered by her private collapse. I set down my coffee at home as my phone began to vibrate, exactly as I'd anticipated. Elise's number lit up the screen. I let it ring, unanswered. A moment later, a text arrived. "Miles. Answer me right now. What the hell is this? You can't do this. Not like this." I took a calm breath, my finger steady on the phone. "It's already done, Elise." Her response was immediate, frantic, desperate. "You can't just destroy my life. Not like this. Not in public. You've humiliated me." I shook my head slowly, typing a calm, clear reply. "This isn't about humiliation. It's about accountability. The life you built was built on lies. I'm simply choosing not to live that lie anymore." "You chose this path. I'm just walking away." Silence. No further texts, no calls. Elise had run out of words, out of manipulations. Her reality was undeniable now, spread neatly on legal paper before her eyes, quiet and irrevocable. In the cafe, Audrey gently touched her sister's arm. "Elise? Talk to me. What's happening?" But Elise was silent. The illusion of control she'd always relied on was now slipping through her fingers like sand, impossible to grasp, impossible to save. Her carefully crafted persona, unshakable, elegant, in control, had shattered quietly in public view, leaving her raw, exposed, human. She realized too late that perception could only shield you so long. Eventually, the truth always caught up. Audrey took the papers from her, scanning the page quickly, eyes widening in shock. "Oh my God, Elise, he's divorcing you?" Elise nodded once, barely perceptible. "And the assets, the dogs?" Audrey shook her head slowly. You can't let him do this, can you? But Elise only sat quietly, finally confronting the truth she had avoided for so long. I already have, she whispered, voice hollow. Around her, the brunch continued, cheerful and unbothered. Elise's crisis was just a quiet ripple in a sea of normalcy. She was alone in her consequences, unable to hide behind carefully chosen words or calculated gestures. At home, I set my phone aside, turning back to my coffee, feeling no joy or satisfaction, just quiet finality. I had been precise, controlled, methodical. Now, it was simply done. Elise had tried to manipulate reality, to escape consequence, to use perception as armor. But in the end, there was only one simple, immutable truth. Perception can't protect you from consequences you laughed at. And now, sitting alone at brunch while the world moved on around her, Elise finally understood. It was late on a Thursday night, the quiet time when Evanston streets rested, houses dark, and windows gently lit. I sat in my living room, the space calm and uncluttered. Every trace of Elise had already been quietly, carefully removed. Now the apartment was entirely mine, untouched by memories, free of echoes. The phone rang sharply, cutting into the quiet. I glanced at the screen. Elise. I sighed, hesitating only briefly before answering. Yes? Her voice was small, hesitant, lacking any of the confidence that had defined her for years. Miles, it's me. Please just hear me out. I leaned back, closing my eyes for a brief moment. Elise, we've already said everything. No, Miles, please, I'm desperate. I need your help. What is it you want, Elise? She hesitated, taking a shaky breath. I need a place to stay, temporarily, just until I can get back on my feet. I remained quiet, allowing the silence to hang between us for a moment. When I finally spoke, my voice was gentle, calm, detached. Elise, that's not an option. She exhaled sharply, frustration edging into her tone. Miles, I don't have anywhere else to go. My career is destroyed. My friends, they've all stepped away. I'm asking for basic decency. Please. Decency? I echoed softly, shaking my head slightly. You've spent years showing me exactly what decency means to you. It's not something you can just demand when convenient. Miles, please. Her voice cracked with genuine desperation. For a moment, I felt a distant pang of sympathy, but it faded quickly, replaced by clarity and calm. Elise had built this, piece by piece. I was simply refusing to help her put it back together. The lease is in my name only, I explained calmly. It's prepaid through the year, and according to the building's policy, you have exactly 14 days to remove any remaining personal belongings. I've already spoken to management. The silence from her side was heavy, stunned. When she finally spoke, her voice was faint, shaking. You're serious? Yes. Her tone shifted suddenly, sharpened by bitterness. Do you enjoy humiliating me, Miles? Is this revenge? This isn't revenge, I said quietly. This is accountability. You made choices. Now you're living with them. Elise was quiet again, absorbing the reality, grappling with the helplessness she wasn't used to feeling. Please, she whispered finally, her voice barely audible. I'm asking you, as someone who once loved me, at least let me have dignity in this. I paused briefly, choosing my words carefully. Dignity is something you lost when you sat across from me, smiled, and said, "So what?" to your betrayal. You destroyed your own dignity, Elise. I didn't take it from you. She took a sharp, shaky breath, her voice tightening. You're being ruthless. It doesn't suit you. No, I replied quietly. I'm just no longer predictable. There was another silence, deeper, final. Then Elise spoke softly with a weary resignation. I guess you've made your point. No, I corrected gently. You've made my point for me. She ended the call abruptly, leaving only silence. I set the phone down slowly, exhaling a steady breath. The night around me was quiet, peaceful. My life finally felt clear of her manipulations, free from her lingering chaos. The following day, a locksmith arrived precisely at 10 a.m. I stood quietly, observing as the apartment locks were changed, quiet clicks and turns, each movement symbolic. When it was done, The locksmith handed me the new keys, nodded politely, and left. The door closed softly behind him. Inside, I moved calmly through the rooms, gathering the remaining fragments Elise had left behind. A forgotten pair of heels, a framed photo from our wedding day, a half-empty bottle of lotion, a stray scarf she had left carelessly draped over the back of a chair. I placed each item into a neat box, labeled simply, Elise. The apartment was finally mine, quiet, clean, free. But there was one more loose end, one final truth Elise didn't yet know. A quiet, necessary step to fully end her hold on my life. My phone buzzed softly. A short message from one of the co-op board members, John from across the hall. Just wanted you to know, spoke with Elise briefly last night, and I made it clear that the board is fully informed of everything. Thank you, I typed back. I pictured Elise's face when John delivered that news. The realization that even her sanctuary, the neighbors who had always smiled politely and welcomed her, now knew her reality. Elise's carefully cultivated public persona was shattered, quietly and irrevocably. She had no more hiding places left. That night, Elise returned quietly, unseen, gathering the box I'd left outside the door, collecting her fragments silently. She didn't knock, didn't call, didn't linger. I heard only a soft shuffle of footsteps and then silence. And then she was gone. Really, truly gone. I moved slowly through the apartment, noting the quiet, empty rooms. The stillness felt powerful, healing. There was no anger left, no bitterness, no lingering resentment, just peace. As I sat quietly by the window, looking out over the city lights twinkling softly, I finally understood the simple truth Elise never grasped. There was no triumph here, no celebration, just quiet, calm finality. She had wanted chaos, control, and power, but the ending was simply quiet, unremarkable, and complete. And now, for the first time in a long while, my life belonged entirely to me. A month had passed. 30 quiet days that belonged entirely to me. No chaos, no manipulation, no lingering shadows of Elise's presence. Life had settled gently into its new rhythm. My home, my routines, my life, all comfortably mine again. Then, early on a crisp, quiet morning, as sunlight streamed gently into the kitchen, the phone buzzed softly on the counter. Elise. Her name didn't bring anger or resentment, just a quiet curiosity, a detached readiness to hear whatever she had to say now. I picked it up calmly, opening the message with a steady, unhurried breath. Miles, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but please, can we just meet for coffee? I don't want anything from you. No favors, no money, nothing. I just need to feel human again, to talk, honestly. Please give me that chance. Elise, I considered her words slowly, thoughtfully, weighing each phrase carefully. There was honesty there, perhaps even a touch of genuine vulnerability. But there was also the familiar pattern, subtle manipulation woven into every word, an attempt at reclaiming some kind of connection. I took a quiet breath, my fingers poised steadily over the keyboard. Then I typed slowly, deliberately, crafting a message that felt true and clear, without malice or cruelty. Elise, you felt powerful when you said, "So what?" That was your moment. This is mine. There's no anger or bitterness left here, just clarity. I'm not interested in revisiting what's done. I wish you well, but there is nothing left to say. Goodbye, Elise. I read it once more, quietly satisfied, and then pressed send. The message disappeared instantly into the silence between us. I hesitated only briefly before opening my contacts, navigating calmly and decisively to Elise's name, and selecting block. Then I went to our old playlists, the digital mementos of shared history, carefully deleting each one. No anger, no resentment, just gentle, quiet finality. Every trace of our shared life, every lingering thread that still connected me to Elise, was now quietly erased. Finally, I closed my laptop, exhaling slowly, calmly. This quiet, decisive action felt like closure, true and complete. I didn't feel triumphant, didn't celebrate, didn't linger. I simply acknowledged the end, neatly and quietly. Around me, the kitchen was silent and peaceful. The table that had once been a battlefield now stood clear and clean, untouched by memories or resentment. It was just a table again, no longer a symbol of betrayal or conflict, just furniture, quiet and neutral. I stood and moved slowly toward the window, looking out at the street below. People moved about their day, neighbors walking dogs, children playing, couples laughing. Life continued, untroubled by Elise or me or the quiet resolution we had finally reached. And standing there, in the calm of that quiet morning, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Peace, not triumph, not revenge. Just the quiet, steady sense of ownership. Ownership of myself, my life, my choices. Elise had taken many things, but she'd never truly taken that. Now, it was mine again, entirely. I turned from the window, the silence feeling comfortably familiar. There was no lingering resentment, no unfinished arguments, no unanswered questions, just quiet acceptance of reality and clarity. The ending wasn't loud or dramatic. It wasn't emotional or bitter. It was quiet, clean, and final. For the first time in years, I felt fully myself again. Predictable, perhaps, but in a way Elise had never understood. Predictable in my calm, my quiet resolve, my clarity. Predictable in my peace. And in that quiet, clear silence, I finally felt free.